Welcome to United Way of King County's weekly live stream update. Before we begin, I'd like to ask that we all take a moment to pause in acknowledgement of the long-standing systemic racism and police-involved violence occurring in our community and across our country, and reflect on the loss of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, Charlene Lyles, and the countless others at the hands of law enforcement. United Way sees and works to address the symptoms of systemic racism, ranging from homelessness and our work in eviction prevention to access to education, and our topic today with food inequities and hunger. This week, we're joined by Yuri Kim, the board chair of the Hunger Intervention Program, and Lauren McGowan, Senior Director of Ending Homelessness and Poverty at United Way of King County. Our discussion today will focus on the scale of food insecurity in our community and the efforts to provide access to healthy, culturally appropriate food, made more urgent now in the light of the pandemic. Today's live stream is presented by Farmers Life Insurance. If you have questions for Yuri or Lauren, please be sure to type them in the chat window. And with that, I'll ask Lauren to start us off.
Well, thank you, Jared, and welcome to everyone who's joining us today. These couldn't be more challenging times. On top of a global pandemic that has resulted in extraordinary economic crisis for our community, we're seeing the incredible impacts of a legacy of racism in this country, of violence on our Black and Brown brothers and sisters and family members. And it's hard to talk about anything else. And yet we know that so many of our communities of color, particularly African Americans, are facing poverty, are struggling with homelessness and food insecurity because of those same systemic oppressions, the same challenging racist systems that we have. And our work at United Way and in our community is to fight against them every day, to leverage our community, our philanthropy, our volunteer network, to come together and provide access to resources now while we work to change the policies so that everyone has equitable access to homes and food and education and opportunity. Today we're talking a lot about food and food really is such an important part of our culture, of our health. And one of the things that we've done a lot at United Way is focus in on programs like the National School Breakfast Program, which was actually started by the Black Panther Party many decades ago. And they saw a need and they said, why wouldn't we bring food to the students, the families that need it? And now today, that is something that happens in every community all across the country. And I think in moments that are incredibly tense and incredibly challenging, some really great ideas can come through. And that's what we're seeing right now in the COVID-19 pandemic is organizations, community members, families are coming together to make sure that the needs of their communities are met. So I'm delighted today to be joined by Yuri Kim. He is the board chair of the Hunger Intervention Program and a former colleague of ours at United Way and a dear friend. So Yuri, welcome. How are you doing?
Thank you. Yeah, I'm doing as well as one can be in times like these. And I also just want to reflect that sitting here from a position of privilege, just recognizing how challenging it is out in our society today, and specifically in our community in Seattle and King County, and just really recognizing that for myself and for organizations like Hunger Intervention Program, food is an issue of race. Food is an issue of disproportionality, and the reason that we exist is because there is not equitable access to food and resources in our community. And we are trying to do our part and our best to address that, while recognizing that there are these systemic pieces in place that just make it really challenging for folks to get access to it. And, you know, there's a swirl of thoughts, I think, in my head, and I think in the heads of lots of folks right now. And all I can do is sort of sit with it and hopefully have an engaging conversation, but really want to acknowledge the challenging times that exist.
Thanks, Yuri, and thanks for joining us in these challenging times. So your organization has done a lot in the last few months to take a model that you already had and pivot it to respond to the COVID crisis. So can you first just tell us a little bit about HIP and then how you've been pivoting?
Yeah, so Hunger Intervention Program is an organization that I am tremendously proud to be a part of. They've been around for over 10 years. And while it's sort of grown and evolved and changed over time, they have always been focused on providing meals to families and populations that need them. Throughout our history, we've provided meals for students, for people experiencing homelessness, and for older and vulnerable populations. And so today, the work that Hunger Intervention Program does is really focused on providing meals to students. So filling in those gaps when students may not have access to meals through schools. So that looks like providing after-school snacks in the Lake City Community Center. That looks like running a large number of summer meal programs during the summer when kids are out of school. And that also looks like providing weekend backpack meals for kids so that whenever they are out of school during the weekends, they have access to some healthy and nutritious meals for themselves and for their families. The other big program that we've run is focused on older adults and senior populations. So the work has historically been providing senior meal programs out of Lake City Community Center 3 days a week. And then recently, over the past year, we've launched a meal with a focus on East African adults, serving more culturally appropriate food for those populations.
Yuri, that's incredible. How did HIP come about?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So HIP started actually working downtown in downtown Seattle, providing meals for people experiencing homelessness. And like I said, there was a large number of evolution and change that occurred throughout those years. And so through that work downtown, we ended up partnering with a lot of different organizations like Operation Sack Lunch and others, and just found that that gap was then being filled. And so we then moved up to the North Seattle, North King County area. And then that's when the current shape of what it looks like now, really just trying to address gaps in prepared meals for that community.
I love that. So you really pivoted along the way to respond to where the need is and find your niche. And, you know, for all of those organizations right now who are, I think, trying to do just that, what advice do you have for folks? What have you used from, you know, your past learnings in order to be able to respond so quickly during this COVID crisis?
Yeah, you know, I will speak as a board member. I can't take credit for the great work that the staff are doing. We have an incredible staff, and I'm very blessed to be able to represent their work. What's been great about HIP is, you know, we are an agile organization. Just sort of by being able to be a fairly small organization, we are able to pivot pretty quickly. And so, what we've really done is, what the staff has really been able to do is just figure out what resources exist and what sort of staying focused on the core mission of getting those populations that need access to food and access to meals, and figuring out then, like, all right, if that's the core mission, how do we do this in these trying times? And so some key sort of ways in which that we did that work has been for a senior meal program, recognizing that we can't do congregate meals, which is unfortunate because building a community is so important of that program. We have been able to do takeout meals. So family folks can still come by the community center and grab a meal as they need it. Along with that, we recognize that, especially for some of the more vulnerable populations, they aren't able to be as mobile. And so we've started doing meal delivery programs to those same groups of people in partnership with Sound Generations. And then the other thing that we've been able to do is for our student groups has been taking advantage of the federal programs that have been launching around providing basically summer meals, but during the springtime. And since we had the infrastructure in place, we were able to quickly mobilize our staff and volunteers to be able to open up sites where we normally would have been. And then the last thing, and I could talk about the work they've been doing forever, but the last thing I'll say for now is partnering with the schools that we've already had relationships with the weekend backpack programs, and just going to where Seattle Public Schools has been serving their meals, being able to go in on Fridays and be able to offer up the weekend backpacks through those existing avenues. So really just trying to figure out, sticking core to our mission, figuring out where we can continue to do our work and building off of the existing infrastructure we had access to.
That's pretty amazing. That's a lot of different programs that have come together and responded to the need. Let's talk about the need. Why are so many more people struggling right now?
Yeah, I mean, it's the pandemic flipped everything around, right? I think we went from having a really strong economy where, despite having a strong economy, you still had people who were out of work and were financially insecure and food insecure, to being in a situation where that has gotten even worse. I think when you look at the news today, you sort of see the amount of need that there is nationally when you look at the lines of food banks out the doors. We have seen a similar need within HIP. So in the example of senior meals, on a typical day, we were serving over 100 meals, just about over 100 meals a day. But now through, since the pandemic, that number has gone up to about 150. And again, I just think it's a combination of there not being as many jobs, and so people are struggling financially, and also the quarantining and the lockdown that has now occurred has just forced people to not be able to go out and sort of do the shopping by themselves, and so that's been a lot tougher. One other thing that's sort of specific to some of the vulnerable populations that we've been working with is because of the lockdown, some of the systems that were in place to get them to grocery stores and stuff have sort of broken down. So one story I heard from a staff member at HIP was they've been doing grocery deliveries, and one of the people that they served the meals to normally would rely on her children to help her get around because she is unable to see or drive for herself. And so because of the quarantining, that hasn't been as an option for her. And so we've been able to sort of step up and provide that, fill in that gap. But, that gap wouldn't exist outside of this pandemic.
That is a really, really good point. I think about the fact there's 100,000 students in King County that needed and relied on free and reduced lunch before the pandemic. So many more who were just above that income threshold, right? Whose parents every single day were struggling to get by, particularly because of the high cost of housing in our community. And now to be shut off of new income coming in, these other programs like school meals, or not having access to these grocery delivery programs, all of that just compounds the challenges. And despite living in a country where there is plenty of food, right, we have families that literally don't know where their next meal is going to come from. we know that the work that your team is doing is so incredibly important, but it is not the long-term solution, right? And that we need to advocate for programs like SNAP that put the food purchasing power in the hands of individuals so they can meet their dietary needs and their cultural needs. Tell me about what other advocacy efforts your team is thinking about and why advocating is so important.
Yeah, absolutely. HIP is a meal program. Hunger intervention program is a meal program, and I think we view ourselves as essentially a band-aid solution, right? Like this is not, the work that we do is important, but should not be the long-term way we solve hunger in our community. I think we should be a cog in a larger approach to tackling this. And we are strong proponents, and we have an advocacy arm that really is focused on trying to change policies to make it so that there's greater access to resources to solve hunger. For us, greater access to SNAP is huge. I think, one of the things that we've been thinking a lot about, and one of the best ways to tackle, especially childhood hunger, with schools being out, is providing extra dollars for SNAP, for food stamps, so families can fill in that gap that not having school meals has left. I think that is huge, right? Like while we are so happy to be able to provide meals for folks and be able to do drop-offs and have places where people can pick up, if we could instead have them get SNAP dollars to help them, buy groceries for themselves, it's just the smart approach for all this.
Absolutely. And if we take it back to where we started of, thinking about racial equity and who's furthest behind, it's making sure we have a strong safety net that is can be accessed in an equitable way, that we have good paying jobs, that folks have access to good education, right? It's all of these layers that come together. And then when you don't have those, it's so important that there's organizations like yours that are there to fill in the gap while we're fighting for those longer term changes. Yuri, tell us, what are your biggest needs right now? What do you, if somebody wants to get involved, how can they best get involved in your work?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm again happy to talk about hunger intervention program, but I think like holistically, when thinking about really tackling the issue of hunger in our community, there's a couple of big things, right? So advocacy is huge. I don't think I can stress that enough. I think not only speaking around issues of hunger, but like as we, sort of zoom back to the conversation we were having before, just around police brutality and race, structural racism, there's just like so much that we all should be thinking about in terms of talking to legislators and voting and thinking about the right policies.
Voting.
Yes. And the other
and taking your census.
Yes, which matters because that's how federal dollars get allocated, right?
Exactly.
Yes, all very important things. The other thing is, donating. I think while food is always helpful, I would say for HIP, we are lucky to have a strong partnership with Food Lifeline, and so we're able to get access to a lot of food. But there are things where when we're trying to be a little more specific or culturally appropriate, or we are trying to fill in certain gaps around produce and meats, we do a lot of purchasing ourselves. And so being able to get donations to help us get access to buy more food is really huge. And while we have reduced the number of volunteers that we are relying on to do our work, just in order for us to do our work safely, we still are actively looking for volunteers to help with meal prep and meal distribution. And so those are like the three big things that we think would be really helpful. And then the last thing is just like raising awareness, right? I think people don't, I think that there's a lot going on and in the world, and issues of hunger remain something that is going to be that should be top of mind in the foreseeable future, and just sort of educating yourself on the challenges that exist and ways that you could help.
That's great, Yuri. It's so it just so inspires me that we have organizations like yours doing incredible work, leaders like yourself, who are responding to this moment in time. United Way is so excited that we're able to share some of our AmeriCorps Vista resources with your team, and provide some grant funding to help boost this work up. And look forward to working with you and other members of our emergency food community to really think about how we address this for the long term. Because I think your point is right that, even as we start to peel back from the immediate health impacts of COVID-19, the long-term economic issues are going to be there, and hunger is going to be there for a while. And we need to make sure that there are sustainable solutions for folks. We need to make sure that there are equitable solutions for folks, and that we take this vast resource that we have in our community of food, of inspired people who want to get involved, and make sure that food gets to the people that need it, that it's culturally appropriate food, and that access is there for anyone that needs it every single day. I think you and I both share the vision. We want to make sure that there are 3 meals a day, every day, for anyone that needs it. And we are just excited to continue partnering with you to make that possible. Anything else you want to share with us, Yuri?
Yeah, no, I mean, I have to thank United Way, but I clearly have a spot for the organization. And speaking as a board member of HIP, recognizing that the reason we're able to continue to do our work is through support through United Way. It's worth recognizing that you all pivoted as well during the COVID-19 response with your AmeriCorps. And we were lucky enough to be able to get a couple extra AmeriCorps to come to HIP for a couple of months to help us really continue to do our work in a way that remains safe, but also is really impactful. And so want to provide kudos there, and just want to sort of thank you all for the great work that you all have been doing as well.
Well, as 2 fellow AmeriCorps alums, I think we can both say we know the value of the National Service Resource, and that is also something that as a community we need to keep advocating for. AmeriCorps members are an incredible resource. We did a live stream about that just a couple of weeks ago, and we want to make sure that that continues to be available to everyone that wants to serve our community. AmeriCorps members can not only help us get things done today, but they create a pipeline of civically engaged leaders for tomorrow. Yuri, thanks for joining us. I think we're going to take it out for some questions now.
Thank you, Yuri, and thank you, Lauren. We do have a couple of questions in the YouTube chat window here. I'll start with Alberto's question. Why do you think people of color experience food insecurity at higher rates?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. And, I will say in the work that HIP does, we try to keep barriers super low. So we don't do a ton of data collection on that. But what we do know from the data is that food insecurity disproportionately impacts people of color. And I think, the root causes are, as we were talking about, sort of systemic, right? And it also makes me reflect a lot about like the stuff I've been reading about how COVID-19, while it is a virus, is disproportionately impacting people of color. And, the big reasons are, those are the populations that tend to not have access to the same economic opportunities. Those are the people of color tend to live in communities that may be in more food deserts, or may not be able to get access to healthy food. There's a whole vast array of just challenges that sort of exist in the communities that we all live in that just make it tougher for people of color. Lauren, do you have thoughts to add?
Yeah, I mean, I would just say, the data is very clear that not only is it people of color, but Black families struggle with food insecurity at a higher rate, as do Latinx families. And it's poverty, right? I mean, the reality is you don't just you don't catch hunger, right? It's not like COVID, right? It is you don't have enough money to pay for food. And that is because of our long-term structural racism and problems with our job, our economy, our financial systems. And so it's so deeply rooted in that. And it is one of the things that we can address. We can address those systemic issues while also addressing hunger at the same time. Whereas some other issues are much more challenging to do, we can rely on programs like SNAP or like PIP in this moment in time while we're fighting those other structures and fighting for reforms, and make sure that every single person has food today. And we should demand that. I mean, food is the most basic of things. Food, housing, everyone should have it.
Hear, hear. I've got time for another 2 questions probably. Yuri, what do you hear from people you are serving? Any stories you can share from the people that you're working with?
Yeah, no, again, as a board member, I typically have to rely on the staff that are doing the great work, but in talking to them, we've just heard a lot more from families that have, like I said, been in situations where they may not have, where pre-COVID-19, they were in tougher situations, but still manageable. So like I was sharing the story of a woman who was typically relying on some of her older sons and daughters to help her get to grocery stores that just no longer have access to that. And because we've been able to provide grocery deliveries, we've been able to help her out in that way. We also recently partnered with Treehouse to provide some grocery delivery for families, for foster families that got reconnected. And so it's just been, you just hear the struggles of folks that were previously struggling, but now have been in tougher situations. And, we've been trying to help where we can.
All right, our last question as we approach the end of our time today seems like one that United Way might generate themselves. Can you talk about the value add of donating to United Way?
Yeah,
go for it. I will say, again, I am a donor to United Way, a proud donor. And, the reason I do it is because for me, United Way is an organization that is really has an eye on the community as a whole, especially around issues of poverty, issues of homelessness, issues of hunger. And they are able to strategically utilize the resources and then partner and sort of leverage other resources to make big systematic changes, which is why I am a donor to United Way.
Thanks, Yuri. I think in this moment in time, we are so proud to partner with folks like you. And that's what this community is all about. United Way has been working to address hunger for a long time. Over the last 5 years, we've really taken a leadership role statewide in addressing hunger for children and leading the state's No Kid Hungry campaign. And that really positioned us to be able to pivot during COVID and work with school districts, work with our government partners to help get emergency food vouchers out to families, to work with our food banks, and perhaps, again, most importantly, to advocate for the changes that we need at a local, state, and federal level. So, I've had the privilege of working at United Way for a long, long time. It is for all the reasons that Yuri said and more. And it's really because of this community. It's people that are watching today. It's people that we get to work alongside, our volunteers, our grantees, our community partners, our donors, people who want to make a change. And by investing in United Way, you can help make that change, dream a little bit bigger, envision a community where every single person has access to healthy food every single day. And we're going to go fight and we're going to make that happen. And in order to do that, we need to address the racist systems that we have in our community. And we are committed to doing that and learning alongside other community activists and groups that have been doing that for a long, long time. So that's why I invest in United Way.
Thank you. Yuri, Lauren, our time has come. Any final thoughts before I read us out?
Don't forget to register to vote and do your census.
I'll second that. I will say, if you're interested in learning more about HIP, go to hungerintervention.org. And we welcome your questions, your comments, your volunteering, and your dollars.
All right. Thank you both. Thank you, Yuri and Lauren, for joining us today and your work to help meet the critical needs so many who are being hit hard by the economic impacts of this pandemic. Thank you to Farmers Life Insurance for presenting today's live stream, and thanks to our viewers for your questions and supporting your community through donations to United Way of King County's Community Relief Fund. There will be no live stream next week on June 10th, but we hope you will join us on Wednesday, June 17th, when we'll be joined by Maria Jose Morales, a homeless employment specialist for Casa Latina, and Wayne Wilson, United Way Impact Manager, to talk about how Casa Latina is helping people build an income and move into stable housing. You can watch all of our live streams at uwkc.org. In the coming days, I ask that we all reflect upon our roles in standing up for racial justice in our community, that we be aware of the ongoing violence and listen to voices calling for change. We can use our privilege, influence, and platforms to create that meaningful change.